Okay, so since we were last on, I ended up cutting out that about an inch tall piece that had all the pitting right up in here. And you should be able to tell that I just have it tacked in place. If I hadn't cut this pillar before I really started over here, I can't even remember why I cut this, but at any rate, I would have saved myself some work if I hadn't cut it, because I ended up digging out the other half of it out of the bin and cutting this out. So now we should be to where you would be if you hadn't have made that mistake. So I just have this pillar clamped in place. I've taken some of my body hammers and kind of tried to round out this edge to match the cab corner as best as it will. I made a few cuts down here where I was trying to push it out. So that's decently close. I'll have to cut out some more cuts to make them wider so I can work that in a little bit more. But the bottom, I'm going to have to probably cut off the bottom of this and make a new piece to go down there, because there's just not enough material to make that curve. So last time I told you that I was going to take this flange and make it wider. I had to do the same thing on the other side, but see, they don't give you much room. I mean, that's like 1/2 inch. And your bolt holes are close to 1/2 inch anyway, so there's just not enough material there to actually be able to get a bolt through. So the way I'm going to address that is I simply took a piece of little notes, get a whole big pack at the Dollar Tree, and I just set it in there and put some tape on it, and I cut off the excess, and then I took a little pencil, and if you press down on that edge and then you go over it with a pencil, it kind of outlines the edge. You can barely see it. You probably can't see it on the camera, but at any rate, one thing to note is if you were just to cut this flange off in this crease, it's very hard to clean up a crease like that. And what you end up doing is you either use one of these 2-inch flap discs and tear the crap out of it in 30 seconds, the edges, because that's all you can use to get in that crease. Or you can use something like this to get in the crease and clean it up, but then you still have to go back in with the flap wheel, and it really kills the life of your flap wheels when you run them on the edge. So what I'm going to do is actually come out from that crease about 1/4 inch and chop that off. That way I don't really have to use the corner. I can just get in there with the 2-inch and I've got plenty of space to work. I'm not having to clean up that crease. So that'll go smoothly. And I'm going to go ahead and make this flap, this piece that comes out, I'm going to go ahead and make it the same size as the floor pan sticking out right here. And then, maybe you can see this. Let me see here. Yeah, so if you can look, this door jamb comes down but doesn't line up. So this silver mark, I'm going to have to cut that and tweak it back a little bit and fill that in. There's no way I'm going to avoid dealing with that corner, but that's okay. I'll just splice it, tap it over where I need it so it lines up with the rest of the door jamb, and then we'll fill it in, and I'll use the tool that I showed you before, the burr, to clean it up, and then use the 2-inch flap wheel. Let's see. So I'll go ahead and do that, and when I come back, I'll probably show you how I do the bottom of this piece, because that might get a little tricky. Okay, so I cut out a short piece, but if you recall, the back of this didn't line up with the door jamb. So I was going to have to make two separate pieces. So what I decided to do is just make one long piece. And what I'm going to do, let's see if you can see that, is I'm going to bend that long piece I tack welded on there to match the curve of the rest of the pillar. Okay. So I'm just working this piece. I don't know if you can see it or not. I'm just working the piece down the curve, as you can kind of see, and I'm just spot welding it as I get it in the right spot. A little too much, that's okay. There we go. And I went a little too far right there. I'm trying to do this in a way that if you got the basic tools to be doing this stuff, you can do it. I could have made this piece on this shrinker stretcher pretty easily and matched the curve before even welding it, but I know most people don't have a shrinker stretcher, so this is the way you do it if you don't have one. Some people might have taken this piece and bent it by hand, but the problem when you do that is you put a lot of stress and tension in this piece when you just... Basically, the key is you don't want to bend it any more than you have to if you're not using a shrinker stretcher, because you can compensate with this. You can't really compensate by hand, so just a little note. That's why I'm just doing little bit by little bit and trying not to do more than I need to and having to move it back, because you're just putting a bunch of strain. It's like a paper clip. You bend it a couple times, you're okay, but if you keep bending it, you're going to be in trouble. And I don't know if you can see up in there, but there's no gap. There's not enough gap. It's overlap. So I'm going to have to cut that real quick. Hopefully you can see that little gap that I cut and filled it in. But see, from the side you should be able to tell it's looking pretty good. We'll just keep working it. Okay, now I'm going to bring you back over to the truck. It's hard to see through all the clamps, but I had to bend that out. So now I'm going to make a little triangle piece to fit in that gap. That's why sometimes I save little scraps, because you never know when you can use something like this, because that'll fit right down in where I want it, and I can use it to fill the gap. So more or less, let's see if this will focus for you. That piece that you put in there, it doesn't have to fit perfectly. But what it does is it basically creates more filler. So as the metal is melting, you've got a little bit more substance there. Don't grab the hot metal. It burns your hands. So anyway, that's why I made that little shim. So I'll go ahead and finish this up. It turned out pretty good though. It'll fit in there nicely. I could bend this top edge back in and make it fit like it needs to. But that's how I created the thicker flange, and then I'll just trim up to match the door jamb where your rubber sits. And after I clean this up, I'll come back to you and show you what I do for the bottom down there. Alrighty, so I got my flange welded up decent, and cleaned up the seam. Like I said, you want to try and avoid that because it's such a pain to clean that seam up. I'll end up trimming this off later and making a little bend on the edge. But now I'm going to focus on this corner. So I've drawn a little line here. I'm going to cut that and bend the bottom down, and then we'll see where we're at. Odds are I'm going to cut about 1/4 of an inch off the inside here, so I can weld a new flange on there, wide enough to come and meet this curve on the cab corner. So enough talking. So if you took this pillar off, you could cut shim, but basically filler pieces to go here and here to bring the flange over that way and clear that gap. It's not a big gap. Let me see if I can show you. So hopefully you can see that gap right there. You could make filler pieces and just tack it all together and then do a lot of cleanup work. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and make a curve, a whole bottom curve to that. So it's just one nice solid piece. I'll show you the flange. You can tell that the flange came out pretty good. So when we come back, we'll have a corner down there. Well, I figured I'd show you how I do this, just in case somebody wants to get a shrinker stretcher. So here's my flat piece. I just cut it out. I know I'm gonna have to cut excess off anyway, so I'm not really concerned with how big it is. When you want to make a curved flange, you always bend the flange first. So I drew my line. Actually, not too straight. So the way a shrinker structure works, if you want to make this a U shape, if you want to curve it, you shrink it in the middle, and that draws the sides in. Now I need to go over here and look. If you have a lighter duty shrinker and you're not seeing much movement, don't stick the piece so deep in the jaws of the machine. So here's our piece, and we want to make a new bottom for this. So if I compare that, that's pretty darn close. And I can actually grind out some of this to match this. So I can pretty much stop there. And what I'll do is there's going to be extra. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is cut that off so I can better tell what's going on, because I can't get my patch. I can't get this piece to fit up right because there's all this in the way. So hopefully you can tell, but I need to cut off some of this in here to allow the piece to get closer. I don't know how much.
I need to bend the flange back out some, so what I'll do, stick it in the jaws, stick a screwdriver down on there. Just like that. Bend the flange out.